Okay, well, if not, Hector, thank you very much for the presentation. Greatly appreciate it. It's great to see
Thank
this
you.
looked at again from an even further perspective than I have done before. So that's fun. So the next step here was that we were going to discuss, well, go into a moderated discussion. So let's see, I'm trying to share a slide that Ruth put together for us. Hopefully it's visible right now. So the moderated discussions were intended to focus on a number of questions, and they would include what is the scope in which rebel and disobedient AI should be incorporated. Then the second was that, having talked about metrics, objectives, and beliefs, what are the crucial components needed to be modeled by a RAD AI agent? The third is there a crucial difference between virtual RAD AI and RAD robots? And then finally, the work that I was led by Alexander Coleman working with me. We talked about different dimensions of AI rebel agents. And the question here is what dimensions are considered to be important or interesting to investigate and why. And if I can flip to that slide, but my machine is very slow right now, it goes over those dimensions. So it's so slow, I can't even pop it up right now. Excuse me, I've got a problem with my machine. So there we go. So the first of these, and there are 8 of them, is pertains to design intentionality. So rebellion can be intentional by design or emergent based by being triggered dynamically as the execution of the system is ongoing. They differ in terms of expression. Rebellion can be explicit, in which case the alter is the agents against which the rebellious agent rebels, and the rebel agent's behavior they may be clearly defined and identified, but they also this kind of rebellion can also be implicit, such as when the rebel agent is expressing a contrary opinion, but not necessarily the reasons why. The focus could be inward on agent's own behavior, such as resulting in a refusal to behave as it's ordered, or it could be outward, such as a protest against the alter, who's deviating perhaps from what the rebel detects as being socially acceptable behavior. The fourth dimension that we talked about is what we call interaction initiation. So the interaction can be reactive, the robot reacts to an alter's action, or it could be proactive, in which case, again, the rebellious agent is initiating a rebellion, as opposed to just reacting to something that's taking place and saying, no, we shouldn't do that. So normativity is the dimension in which, well, for example, a normative rebellion occurs when the rebel takes actions from those permitted, whereas non-normative rebellion it's acting perhaps in a more interesting way in ways that are not explicitly allowed or forbidden, but does instead diverge from the agent's current commands. The 6th of the 8 dimensions is action or inaction. So rebellion may involve explicit action by a rebel or non-manifest inaction, such as when a rebel develops a negative attitude towards an alter. The 7th is individual or collective. Can be involved. So rebellion could be obviously involve just a single individual or group of collective or a collection of agents. Finally, egoism or altruism. Agents that rebel to support their own well-being demonstrate egoism, whereas those that are doing so in support of other agents can be referred to as being examples of altruistic rebellion. So there are many dimensions of this notion of rebellion as we discussed them in our earlier work. And we could imagine that some of these could be useful for distinguishing obedient and disobedient activity on the part of an agent. So these were the questions that we're putting forward to hopefully stir some discussion now. And I welcome thoughts from the audience on these. Ruth, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's about it. I would start with maybe the first question, because unfortunately we don't have a lot of the people that we had in the first session that have dealt with trust and when is it socially acceptable for a robot or for an agent to deceive, for example, because I think they would have a lot to say about the scope of when we want our agents to rebel or disobey. Um, I think that first of all, this might be something that we should address. When I was doing my uh, job search and I presented the idea of the Seeing Eye robot and I talked about intelligent disobedience to a lot of different people, one of the most interesting comments I got was, who would like to sponsor an agent that can disobey?
Well,
And
point is, you want to then say something along the lines of, here's why disobedience is so important. So with respect to the Seeing Eye dog, the Seeing Eye dog obviously could be in a position in which to protect the I don't know, sorry, I'm not sure what the phrase is, to protect the person that they're helping. So for example, this might be to prevent them from crossing the street at an unsafe location, to do other things that would ensure that the human's not about to enter into harm's way in some way, shape, or form. So that might be rebellious in some sense. You provided others as well earlier when in the first session. The point being that rebellion is not necessarily rebellion against the intentions of the operator, as I like to refer to it, but instead maybe in support of what the operator would do if the operator had all the information that the agent has. So honestly, when we went through all the papers at the poster session, I was very enthusiastic because the ways in which disobedient agents could be applied in the world became much much clearer to me as being very large in scope. And we've discussed the Seeing Eye dog here, but we've also discussed how it could be extended into reinforcement learning agents, how it could be extended into the kinds of robots that Walterio discussed, the handheld robots, and I was thinking about safety in that regard as well. But it could be much more than that. It could be, and I kept coming back to the topic of training. A variety of the presentations could be put into a training context, so as to say use video segments of rebellious versus non-rebellious, if we may refer to it that, or as disobedient versus non-disobedient examples of behavior by robot or by someone, and provide this to someone as training material, saying, in this case, do you want to be rebellious or not? Now, here's what we mean by this. And a lot could be gained from seeing the divergence of different kind of behaviors on the part of the agent to understand the situations, or better understand or exemplify the situations in which that's very much valued by the person who may benefit from that. So I understand why people will push back on you like that, but I'm guessing you probably had a quick reply to them to give them some examples of this type.
I was going on a different direction. I was usually saying that we already have machines that don't act as we want it to, as we want them to, but at least that we want them to be intelligent when they do that. But I think that you've made an interesting point here, because you've talked about Walterio's work on handheld tools, the Seeing Eye robot, and we had training and educational domains that were discussed. All of these are collaborative, cooperative domains where you assume that the agents strive to collaborate, which is very much in the spirit of shared plans and a lot of other work on collaborative intentions. It's more than just it's not necessarily having the same goal, but it's having the intention to cooperate and to assist others as well. And I think that that might be something that's very important to highlight. I don't see, maybe others have other opinions on that. Do we care, or are we interested in, or is it relevant to talk about rebel agents in a non-cooperative context?
So in my mind, yes. So for example, if you have two agents that are collaborative with each other, but one of those is the human and the other is the agent that is actually in the environment, and that environment is an adversarial environment, that's when you can perhaps talk about some of these issues. But in terms of the two original agents, the human and the robot acting in a non-collaborative fashion, I'm less certain that there are, well, good ideas that come to my mind in regards to why they would want to purposely be rebellious against each other. So I had to think about that further.
So here is a potential example of that. So in the adversarial setting, there are these competitive games. There are the rules of the game that you cannot violate because the game engine will not let you hack. But assuming no hacking, there are these rules of the game that you should follow, like in a real-time strategy game, adversarial game. But there are these implicit rules that sometimes are agreed upon. They're not part of the rules of the game, but they are agreed upon from the adversaries. Here is an example of one. They agree in the real-time strategy game for the first 5 minutes, nobody will attack anyone else. And the idea is you want to build your economy, your base, you produce your units. So there's a 5-minute clock, but it's not part of the rule of the. It's an agreement, ladies and gentlemen agreement, that they will not attack within 5 minutes. So they are following the rules, and then one of the players attacked or rebel agent, and at that point, within those 5 minutes. So that would be a pirate where the rebel agent would quote rebel to that rule because he had been attacked and attack back. So that would be an example of
a modeling rebellion just in general like that. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon, you popped up. Did you have some thoughts on this?
Well, I think the contrast between a sort of cooperative and adversarial situation is interesting, and I guess I would suspect just in social context in general, I mean, you would actually want to be able for an intelligent social agent to sort of ascertain when it should switch from a cooperative or collaborative mode to an adversarial mode. For instance, if it's determined its interaction partner is actually acting maliciously or unethically or something like that, you may actually want to sort of adopt a more adversarial stance towards your interaction partner. If your goal is to try to conform to ethical norms or achieve whatever task that you've ascertained your interaction partner is attempting to subvert or circumvent or whatever.
So you make me think that there's always these ethical norms that the agent is trying to support to some degree.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be in an ethical context, but that's sort of the first situation that comes to mind, I think.
Yeah, and it seems to me that in some sense we can think of the if you will, the robot collaborating with those norms, which are representative of society, when they're being adversarial with other agents that are there. And I view that as similar to the example which I was thinking of originally, where we have, instead of the society being represented by the norms, we have just the human that is working with the agent. I guess we call the human the alter, and the agent is acting in support of the alter and does so in a way in which they may be adversarial in the environment with others, but is supporting something. It's either the alter or, as you're suggesting, the behavioral norms of the society or something like that. But I'm struggling to figure out when the agent isn't supporting something. And so that's what I'm coming back to, Ruth. I'm not sure if that makes sense. So I'm failing to really come out of the collaborative mode because I'm always thinking, okay, there's a reason why if you will, the robot or the agent is doing something, and it's doing something in support of what it believes to be the right thing to do. And that could either be the norms that it knows or other specific agents. Even the example in which Alexandra and I were thinking about in terms of the robot assisting in terms of a faculty hiring committee, a young faculty member to speak up on that faculty member's behalf, when the rest of the faculty members are ignoring a recommendation of that young faculty member, it's in support of the young faculty member, even though it's adversarial with respect to other agents in the environment. There always seems to be this notion of collaboration in some sense, it seems.
You might say that if all agents in the environment understood the reasoning, like there is some joint understanding for, like, that if the other committee members have understand the reason for that agent, there's a reason why they entered that agent to advocate for new faculty. They wanted that agent to be around. So it is still in the collaborative settings, even if the agent is contrasting their opinions. Or
Right. So,
but I think that, for example, Cantwan, if that's okay that I'm putting you on the spot, you talked about deception, and a lot of your work is on deception. Deception is not always disobedience or rebellion. Sometimes it's purely adversarial. You have deception that is meant to do something, for example, for cybersecurity reasons, you want to deceive. So you have true opponents. How do you perceive the difference, or where do you see disobedience start?
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm working off like different microphone now. Yes. Okay.
yes.
Yeah. So I mean, like, of course, I've been thinking about kind of this question in my work as well. Like, when, of course, is it appropriate to deceive? When, of course, is it appropriate, I guess, in this case here, to rebel? And I've been conflicted in the sense that, one, the work that I'm doing, of course, is under the guise of having deception that is beneficial to someone, right? So you're deceiving or rebelling in the intent to better someone off.
Collaborative.
Right, collaborate, right? But at the same time, though, you have to ask the question of, like, who's getting bettered and at the expense of who, right? Because in some cases, right, in the seeing eye dog, right, we might see that as being a beneficial type of deception, or rebellion, because it's helping someone of, let's say, like a protected class. But let's say there was also some sort of deception involved in that seeing eye dog that then took advantage of the protected class, that then benefited the company who made it. The question there is, like, sure, there's collaboration, but it's at the expense of maybe people that we as a society don't believe should be taken advantage of. And I think it's a hard question for us to kind of really like make a general scope out of, because I've been like, the reason I had my camera off, because I was like, oh my gosh, like, what is like this word scope was bothering me, because I was like, I don't know if there's this general sense that we can make these claims, because stuff is so very context dependent, so very situation dependent, that I don't even think it's the appropriate question to ask, like, what are these general views of things? Because then also, like, I still find it very fascinating, just the question that we had talked about before, not the question, but the whole idea that you yourself can be 3 different versions of yourself depending on the current, past, or future, right? It's like people themselves are also changing. And then how do we contextualize these ideas of deception and rebellion? I don't know. I'm sorry. This is totally not a concise, well put together answer, because I myself am also grappling with it. But if anyone else wants to chime in too.
So so I had a nice conversation earlier with Walterio in the poster session. Let me see if we can bring him into the discussion if he's, thank you, appreciate Walterio. So I was wondering, do you see examples of this in the context of handheld tools in which it's not collaborative in nature?
So maybe it was not very obvious, but the experiments we did, one was obviously collaborative, disobeying in order to be collaborative and helping you. But the second experiment I showed, where we tried to predict the intention of the user, we actually asked the robot to rebel. So we, on purpose, make the robot to do something which we know is contrary, exactly the opposite of what the user wanted to do. Still valid for the task, but contrary to what we know the user wanted to do. And we do this rebellion, and I make the distinction of rebellion precisely being a totally different action compared to the one you wanted to do. We do this rebellion on purpose so that the signal that we get from the users is stronger. Because when you do experiments with people, it's very difficult to get the right signal. And especially if you try to predict intention in a task which is mostly cooperative, people and subjects may just go with the flow and don't really complain, and they see things happening, or they might be overhyped that they're trying a new toy. So it's very hard to get right signals. But if you frustrate people, if you actually rebel against what they wanted to do, then they really react and they say, this robot is doing something really wrong. And therefore, we actually know that our prediction is right because we know exactly what you wanted to do. We did the opposite to what you wanted to do. And then we get, as researchers, a better signal. So at least rebellion from the point of view of surfacing better signals for research, to me, is very clear.
And again, I'm sorry, I keep coming back to the idea of, okay, it's rebelling, but it's rebelling because it's trying to collaborate with the researchers so as to get that better signal. and so I'm having difficulty in separating out the notion of rebellion versus someone versus.
So that's, well, but if you think like that, then that is never ending, because rebels do work together, right? So rebels work together and they cooperate in rebellion, right? So the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars was working together and they were cooperating, right? So it's just a different point of view.
But in that case, there was an adversary. There was a party that.
Well, the adversary is the conflict of you getting the right signal in the case of our experiments. The adversary is how, and we can actually show this, we can show that if you don't rebel, the signal is very weak, because the baseline, which is random actions, they don't surface a signal as well, but rebellion does. So it's super interesting, this discussion, of course, but at the end of the day, rebellion and cooperation are just points of view from what I can gather.
Yeah. Ruth, I keep getting back to the idea of thinking, okay, we'll just break this down as what a student of AI, a modern approach would do, and go back to looking at, the definitions of different types of environments, etc. And in some we have adversaries and some we don't. And I could imagine that likewise, we can describe rebellion and rebellious behaviors more generally being ones that could be applicable in some of each type. So both collaborative as well as adversarial environments.
Thomas, you added a comment. Do you want to elaborate?
Sure. I was just trying to think about the globally adversarial agent. We talk in our paper a little bit about global disobedience, where there's nothing further or over that is being obeyed. And so a little tongue in cheek, but it does, literature can help sometimes. So just thinking about an agent that embodies that. And there's the kind of villain, or whoever you want to designate him as, Anton Chigurh, is just is not understandable or even intelligible to the other characters in the movie, because there's just a sense that Chigurh can't be contained by any higher principle and can't be negotiated, manipulated, or anything like that because of it. So I just, more of a thought provocation about what the quality of that agent would be, because the moment you say there's would be a purpose for that agent, then that's the object around which one could presumably form a larger, wide lens collaboration. But yes. I like the provocation. I mean, I like this kind of provocation to go through and ask where, how rebellion, what the scope of it is. So thank you.
That use of fictional character, when you described that, I was like, well, now you're just describing the Joker in the Dark Knight, and the way in which, like, you know, they always talk about chaos, right? But like sometimes it's the idea of how do I maximize the most amount of disorder within a system just because I find it fun, right? Like sort of idea where there's no cooperation, there's almost no goal really, in the sense of just trying to maintain everyone else's unmaximization.
But that seems like a goal, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I
The
agree.
Joker does a lot of talking about why he's doing
But
what he's
is it
doing.
rebelling? Because
but at that-
in
yeah, exactly.
rebellion, you assume that you have some goal that you rebel against. That
I sense that it could be framed as rebellion in this. So sticking with the Joker example, the Joker is trying to rebel against society, really is what it comes down to. And maybe that will result in, I don't know, in the worst case, everyone dying in Gotham City except the Joker. And that's not really in the interest of anybody there. So it's rebellion and countering social norms. And so that seems like a good example, but it seems like it's one dominated by, if there's no collaboration, then it means that, gosh darn it, that agent's acting alone. Or I don't know, maybe that's focusing too much, because it could be a group of individuals that are collaborating together. But when there are no other agents out there, I guess there are examples of rebellion that don't involve collaboration. Yeah.
I guess one way I was looking at this first question also, kind of to sort of restructure, reframe the question, is kind of like when you're saying scope of disobedience and rebellion. It's like, well, okay, at what point in time does a fully compliant agent go out of scope, right? Or when do you hit a domain in which a fully compliant agent isn't going to behave properly? And I think if you frame it that way, and you always, like, I remember, because I keep talking about deception and deceptive agents, and so I kind of get hit like, oh, who wants a agent that's going to lie to you or deceive you? I kind of get some of those questions as well. And it's like, if you can retwist the thing of like, oh, what happens when you have an overly compliant such and such? Can you think of an idea that way? Sometimes you find the scope is bigger than the person may have thought originally.
Yeah. So one thing we haven't really delved into is there a crucial difference between a virtual RAD AI and RAD robots? I haven't given this much thought at all. What motivated you, Ruth, to think of that?
I think that the main point there that I experienced was the ability to physically disobey or physically perform an action in a robot, of course, that you can leverage your physical agency to change things in the environment. With virtual agents, often, not always, but often, you get a case where the agent can advise or can suggest, but eventually in a collaboration, the person has the ability to overrule something.
I see.
In the physical environment, I feel like there are more cases where the robot needs to act in the environment itself. So I think that there is a difference there where disobedience is more intense, maybe because you will experience it, you will not be able to ignore it.
Yeah. Gordon, I'm reminded of your robots where you do all sorts of crazy things with them and to demonstrate these kinds of things. Any thoughts on this?
Well, I think the class of virtual sort of disobedient agents is pretty broad, and I guess it implicit, I think, in what Ruth's comment was that this notion that a physical robot has sort of more
Heft.
yeah, more heft, more, just the weight of its actions are more significant, and I'm not necessarily, I don't know, in terms of what a non-embodied agent could potentially do. I mean, you could have a lot of potential severe consequences from a sort of non-embodied agent control, having effects in the physical world. So I guess I would have to think more about the argument from severity of effect. But in terms of the visceral kind of reaction you would get from the embodiment of the agent, and it potentially, confronting you in a sort of very personalized way. I mean, I think there is a sort of visceral nature there. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure what to say in that.
Sounds like Ruth's getting at the issue of the alter having to, grabbing the alter's attention.
Right.
Having said that, in a virtual agent, if the virtual agent said, hey, if I press this button, I'm going to cause nuclear war,
right,
that would get my attention right away.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the question is, absolutely, I think that this is why I think this question is interesting. Is there a difference? Is there a crucial difference? I'm not sure there is. It's, on one hand, it does seem intuitive to me that physical agents will have something like a different ability to rebel, or a different set of capabilities that will make them rebellious in ways that virtual agents can't. But that's a very tricky question. Even if you just think about what's the difference between a virtual agent and a robot. I was participating in the AI HRI symposium recently, and they had a discussion there on what is a robot, and whether Alexa, for example, is a robot. Because if you take the sense, reason, act paradigm, then it can sense because it can hear you. It can reason, and it can act. You can order food with Alexa and have a delivery person come to your door. So potentially it has an effect on the physical environment as well. So is Alexa a robot? Is it, if Alexa rebels against something, tells you, no, I'm not gonna buy that for you because you've already bought too much this month. Is it a virtual agent that rebels, or a robot that rebels against you?
I'm still thinking virtual. I think that you're getting at the point that if it has effectors that can physically manipulate the environment, that makes it a robot, versus those that can make impacts in the environment by, say, calling our favorite delivery person to bring us our meal. That somehow seems different, because it's still in the virtual world where it commits the actions and then depends upon others to do physical manipulation of the environment. But
when you talk about sort of artificial agents, I mean, I think that blurs that line where you could have something that, is purely a virtual agent, but then gains access to essentially an embodied, form, or distributed amongst.
Oh, yeah, I see your point.
Yeah.
So I guess
maybe my argument would be that I think the core factors that we're interested in terms of rebellion, there really isn't a crucial difference. I think it's universal across both virtual robotic agents and everything in between. But I do think that, especially in the HRI community, they are interested in some particular issues in embodiment, and there may be very particular questions, that Ruth brought up about, like, well, how intimidating would it be for a physical robot to engage in some sort of act of disobedience or rebellion, versus one that, you have to mentally fill in the gaps of what the consequences are. But I think the core aspects are probably universal.
Does anyone disagree or want to rebel against Gordon in terms of his thinking here? Anyone really see some critical differences between virtual and non-virtual or embedded RAD robots, as Ruth has put forward?
I mean, I might chime in there to say that there is a difference in vulnerability, I would say. Again, it's not a sharp demarcation, but Alexa can be yelled at. There's a great article in Wired about the terrible joy of yelling at Alexa, and it's all about the kind of verbal abuse that could be aimed at Alexa. But that doesn't necessarily affect Alexa's performance in the way that kicking a robot that you're angry at. There's something, I do think there's an intuition about the vulnerability of an embodied system in social space and the exposure of it. That I think HRI researchers would want to say, there may not be a firm line, there may not be and a lot of what is being talked about is still in play, but that's worth kind of exploring a little bit more. Certainly virtual agents can still manipulate us to do a lot of things to us, but there may be just channels that the embodiment is able to use.
Sounds good.
And I wonder if there's ways that the kind of like physical embodiment can maybe like combat against like negative viewpoints that might occur with rebellion, right? So I was exploring that in some of my work before, like if a physical robot lies to you as opposed to a virtual agent lying to you, people are much more okay with the physical robot doing it because it's in some sort of, like the embodiment we use is like the Pepper robot, which is like kind of cute, right? So you can have a cute looking thing doing terrible stuff or rebellious things that might not be terrible. And maybe people just have a better overall viewpoint towards the robot itself. Whereas like what Thomas was saying, like if you have to kind of think or imagine, or maybe it was Gordon, you have to think or imagine like what this robot looks like in your head or whatever, then you can have more negative viewpoints towards it.
Seems to get at the experiences of the individual, if they've had great experiences with a furry little robot versus just horrible situations where that furry robot kind of was trying to bite their neck or something like that. It would give rise to different expectations. So.
And I guess I will chime in again to maybe draw a little bit more of a distinction. I just recalling back some of the work that I did at Tufts on reactions to robot protests. I mean, I do think, based off of people's comments that we got in the post surveys, that when you had the cute little Now robot, that would have this affective display, please don't make me knock down these towers, if you're familiar with that work, it seemed like that affected people a little bit more viscerally than when you had a non-humanoid robot, or you didn't have the sort of affective display. So, the funny thing is, I don't think that really affected the overall rate at which people sort of were dissuaded, if I recall, or at least to a significant amount, with the number of subjects that we ran. But it has that. It does trigger, I think, more of our social kind of affect when you have the embodiment. But again,
here you talk about Now robots and Pepper robots and furry little robots. If we take a Cylon from Battlestar Galactica, or if we even, I think that Spot from Boston Dynamics, it is not, I think that Boston Dynamics is really trying hard to make this robot look more social and more friendly, because it is intimidating. If this kind of robot rebels against something you do, something instinctive about our xenophobic nature would emerge and will be intimidated by that, which I don't think can happen as easily with virtual robots. But maybe, I don't know, maybe Space Odyssey is an example of that. I'm not sure.
I think you're getting at something where it depends on what sort of affective reaction you're getting at. So yes, a bigger or scarier looking robot would probably do better at eliciting negative emotions in the space of fear or similar emotions. Whereas we were talking about a cute little Now robot is more maybe sympathy, or I feel bad that I'm making it do this or whatever.
So I'll feel bad if we don't shift over to the 2 paper presentations pretty soon.